So we are back. Let us read the rule. The rule is saying when a compound subject joined by end, when a compound subject joined by end gives the impression of a unit, the two of them are joined together by end, but they give the impression that they are one. Then the verb becomes singular. When a compound subject joined by one gives the impression of a unit, then the verb becomes a singular verb. Okay, so as in the following example. So let us go. Under that we have an example 1 says bread and butter is ready. Bread and butter is ready. When you have bread, you remember butter. When you have bread, you remember butter. So you underline bread and butter. And when you underline bread and butter, your arrow points downward in the second line. And in the third line, you write your S1. So bread and butter together like that becomes our S1 because they give it the impression of only one unit. And then we have is ready. Under that structure is ready, you underline is, and when you underline is, you draw your arrow downward in the second line. The third line, you write your V1. So we have bread and butter as our S1, and it has taken is as V1. It is therefore wrong of you to say bread and butter are ready. If you say that, it means your S1 has taken V2 because bread and butter is only one unit. Therefore, the correct form is bread and butter is ready. We go to our example 2. Example 2 says, Gari and soup is tasty. Gari and soup is tasty. So there, gari and soup is taken as one unit because there's no way you can eat gari without soup. So you underline gari and soup all together. When you underline gari and soup, you point your arrow downward in the second line. And in the third line, you write your S1. So we have the structure is tasty. Under that structure, you underline is, and when you underline is, you point your arrow downward in the second line. The third line, you write your V1. So we have is as our V1. It is therefore wrong of you to say gari and soup are tasty. If you say that, it means your S1 has taken V2. Gari and soup is only one unit. So the correct form is gari and soup is tasty. You go to our example 3. Under example 3, example 3 says trial and error results in success. Trial and error results in success. Under that structure, trial and error is one unit. When you try something, you must make mistake. If you don't try at all, that's when you are trying a particular situation, you are bound to make mistake. So trial and error is only one unit. So you underline trial and error all together. And when you underline trial and error, you point your arrow downward in the second line, and in the third line, you write your S1. And we have the structure results in success. Okay, results in success. Under that structure, you underline results. And when you underline results, you point your arrow downward in the second line. The third line, you write your V1. So we have results as our V1. It is therefore wrong of you to say trial and error results in success. If you say that, it means your S1 has taken V2. Therefore, the correct form is trial and error results in success. Okay, so we go to our example 4. Example 4 says rice and beans is good for lunch. Rice and beans is good for lunch. That is our example 4. So if you remember rice, you have to remember beans as well. Okay, people cook rice and beans together on many occasions. So rice and beans are. So you underline rice and beans all together. When you underline rice and beans, your arrow points downward in the second line. And in the third line, you write your S1. And then we have is good for lunch. We have this structure is good for lunch. Under that structure, you underline is, and when you underline is, you point your arrow downward to the second line, the third line, you write your V1. So we have rice and beans as our S1, and we have is as our V1. It is therefore wrong of you to say rice and beans are good for lunch. If you say that, it means your S1 has taken V2. Therefore, the correct form is rice and beans is good for lunch. Right, so we go to our example 5. Example 5 says, tea and bread is there on the table. Tea and bread is there on the table. Tea and bread is there on the table. Under that structure, you see when you have tea, you must remember bread. So you underline tea and bread all together. When you underline tea and bread together, that is only one unit. So you have there you when you underline tea and bread together, in the second line you point your arrow downward, and the third line you write your S1. So tea and bread is our S1. And then we have is there on the table. We have the structure is there on the table. Under that structure, you underline is, and when you underline is, you point your arrow downward in the second line, the third line, you write your V1, all right? So that is the end of, we have looked at the first 5 examples. So let us go on our 2 seconds break, and when we return, we pick 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 all together, all right?